Today is a great day in the Chicana kitchen because today we're making empanadas. Empanadas are made across Latin America and they're enjoyed pretty much anywhere in the world that folks get a chance to eat them. These particular empanadas we're making will use an Argentine style dough. It's super easy to work with and it bakes up beautifully golden brown. We can fill them with anything we want, so let's get cooking. We'll start by making our empanada dough, which requires only 5 ingredients: flour, salt, butter, an egg, and a little bit of either milk or water. I'll be using milk. I find it gives the dough a bit more tenderness. Of course, you can use water, and if you do so, keep everything lactose and dairy-free. You can mix your empanada dough with just a pastry blender and a bowl. However, I'll be using my trusty food processor for this one today. Right. So to start, we'll measure out a total of 3 cups of flour. That's 375 grams. To that, we will add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and we're just going to give that a quick blitz in the food processor. If you're mixing by hand, you'll just kind of work that around for a few seconds just to distribute the salt. I'm going to put a towel over this so I don't fire flour out across my kitchen counter. All right. Few pulses are enough. Now we're going to add our butter in. This will take a 1.5 sticks of butter. That is 6 ounces or 12 tablespoons of butter, and I've got it cut just roughly into tablespoon sized chunks. You don't want your butter to be too soft for this. You don't need to have it at room temperature, and you don't want to, because we do want some flakes of some flakiness in this dough, so we need bits of butter interspersed with the flour. So I'm going to put the towel back over this again just to keep the flour from kind of going all over the counter, and we're going to pulse this until the mixture is a little bit like somewhere between sand and pebbles. Okay, the largest bits, like a cookie dough, or sorry, a pie crust dough, we want the biggest bits of butter to be no bigger than pea size. All right, here we go. All right, at this point I'll give it a check, and it looks pretty good. You can kind of see here, sandy with a few more pebbly sized bits of butter in there. And those little bits of butter are going to be what give the dough a bit of flakiness. All right, so I'm going to take my milk. I have 1/3 cup of milk. Again, you could just use water if you prefer. I'm going to crack the egg into the measuring cup with the milk. Give the hands a rinse. Right. And then all of this is going to go into the food processor, and we're just going to mix that until a dough, just barely forms together. All right, so in that goes. The lid and the towel back on. We're just going to pulse that again. And after I pulsed it a few times, I'm going to let that run for maybe 10 seconds at a time now, and see how quickly my dough kind of pulls together. All right, 10 seconds, and you can see we've got dough that has started to clump together. That is ready to go. So what we'll do here, we're going to put a little bit of flour on the counter, and we're just going to work over that with the hands for a minute at the most, just to make sure, probably even less than that, just to make sure that it holds together. If you do use a food processor, a little trick, stick your finger in here and you can kind of dump everything out without the blade coming to. There we go. Blade out of there. And the rest of my dough. I'm just gonna get a little flour on my hands and work over that for really just even a few strokes. It's come together pretty well. So this doesn't have to be as delicate as, in fact, we wouldn't want it to be as delicate as a pie crust dough because it just wouldn't hold together for us. But we don't want to overwork it either. Again, we want to preserve some of that flakiness. All right, so at this point, I have a cohesive dough, no need to knead it any longer. I'm just going to kind of pull that together like so, and I can go ahead and start forming empanadas, or I find it's a little helpful to let it rest for about 30 minutes. It just lets the gluten start to form and will give us a more forgiving, stretchier dough, which is good when we're trying to wrap discs of dough around as much filling as we can squeeze into them. So I'm going to let this dough rest covered for 30 minutes. If your kitchen is very warm, you may want to refrigerate your dough. If it's a relatively cool kitchen, you can leave it on the counter, but just do make sure it's covered so that it doesn't dry out. If you want to pause at this point and continue later, you can park this in the refrigerator for 1 or 2 days, and in fact, you can put it in the freezer for much longer, although usually if I freeze it, I will break it into smaller pieces first. All right, so we will see this dough in about half an hour when we're ready to form our empanadas. While my dough was resting, I pulled together everything else I need to make these empanadas. Empanadas can be filled with any combination or variety of meats, roasted vegetables, cheeses, or beans that you'd like. They are great for using up leftovers, and in this case, I am using some leftover black bean and sweet potato hash that I have in the fridge. Recipe is already on the channel for that one. And for some of the others, picadillo, which is a seasoned, saucy ground beef with potatoes mixed in, and that recipe for that will be on the channel soon. Besides fillings, we have our counter dusted with flour, a little rolling pan handy, and some egg wash, and that's just an egg beaten with a little bit of water. We'll be using that to seal the empanadas and to make their tops nice and glossy. And since we're baking our empanadas today, I've got a baking tray lined and ready to go, and my oven preheated to 375 degrees. So at this point, we can start forming empanadas. Here's my disc of dough. If you have a tortilla press handy, you can always use a tortilla press to do this. I do have one, but I find it's pretty easy to just make these by rolling them out onto the kitchen counter. All right, so I've pinched off a bit of dough. You can get precise about this and measure it out. This quantity of dough can make, depending on the size of empanadas, anywhere from say 15 to 24, 25 of them. Just depends on how big you'd like them to be. All right, I like mine to be a little on the small side, so I have maybe just a bit bigger than a golf ball size bit of dough here, and I'm just kind of rolling that into a ball with my hands. I don't want to overwork it, but again, this doesn't need to be super duper flaky, and it is pretty pliable stuff. So kind of make that into a rough ball, and then we're going to roll it on the counter, and we're going to get that about as thin as we can. All right, we want it to sort of keep more or less an oval shape. Remember, we're going to be folding it together, so we don't need it to be totally round. Oval is a little bit better, and if it is a little bit raggedy at the edges, don't worry about it. So here's my golf ball size, and kind of see about how thin that dough is. It's, I mean, I can see light through it for sure, but it's not quite transparent. It's nice and easy to work with, and that stretched out, my hands aren't very big, but that stretched out to bigger than the size of my hand. All right, so I've got my piece of dough here. I'm going to take a scoop of filling, and you see this is going to be a pretty decent sized empanada, okay, with just that little ball of dough. And I'm going to put my filling not quite in the center, because remember, we're going to be folding this over. If you are new at working with dough like this, err on the side of underfilling it, all right? But the more experience you get with it, the easier it will be for you to get your empanadas kind of full to the brim. All right, so I'm going to brush the edge of that with a little bit of egg wash. I'll try not to get it on the counter, because then my next empanada ball might stick. And then I'm going to just kind of gently stretch my dough over the edge. I've got a nice overhang here. All right, like so. And now you can make it as pretty or not pretty as you want. And you see, it's not, I didn't stretch the bounds of kind of test the laws of physics here. This is definitely not overfilled. I could have gone with a little bit more. I could make this a little bit smaller. All right, and now here you can get as stylish or not stylish as you want. You can just kind of pinch this. You could use the tines of a fork, or if you're feeling a little bit fancy, you can kind of roll it into sort of a rope shape and roll your edges, kind of roll and pinch the edges together. All right, we don't want our filling to leak out, so we do need to do something to seal it. Again, it can just be that fork kind of pinching them over, but I kind of keep rolling and pinching. Long fingernails are not your friend here. FYI, if you have really long, pretty fingernails, maybe go with the fork or something like that. All right, so here we are. We have one empanada down. This is a decent sized empanada here, and I'm going to put that on my baking tray and keep going. And when my tray is filled up, I will be brushing these with egg wash and sliding them into the oven, and I'll show you how that looks in a moment. The first 6 of our empanadas are formed, and they are just about ready for the oven. These wound up being about 4 or 5 inches across and 3 inches in the other direction. So pretty good size empanadas. I'm going to give them a brush with egg wash to make them nice and glossy. And just a couple notes as I do that. If you wound up, this is pretty forgiving dough and usually doesn't get punctured, but if you wound up with a puncture, no big deal. You can just take a little extra pinch of dough and use some of the egg wash to kind of make a patch. That way you don't wind up with your lovely filling leaking out all over the baking tray. Also, a note on how much of the dough I've used. It's actually a little less than 1/4 of the dough. So this recipe will make, for your reference, about 24 empanadas altogether. As far as baking time goes, these are going to go in the oven for, at this size, about 22 minutes or so, give or take. We're going to want them to get just nice and golden. We are not worried about cooking our fillings because those are already cooked though. So we just kind of watch them for color to get an idea of how done our pastry is. And I do like to flip them over for the last few minutes of baking, or else just flip them over when I take them out of the oven, so that the bottoms don't get overly browned. Right. That's it. These are ready for a 375-degree oven. We will see them in about 22 minutes when they are done. While the first tray of empanadas baked, I got these formed and put them onto a plastic-lined baking sheet, and they are ready to slide into the freezer to be ready for a rainy day. As soon as they're frozen solid, I will put them in a freezer bag, and to bake them from frozen, all you have to do is put them on a baking tray and add 3 or 4 minutes to the total baking time, and you're all set. So they're a great make-ahead thing. That said, it is now time to check out our finished empanadas. They have baked, they've cooled just a bit so that they won't scald our mouths when we try them. And as you can see, we've got some nice golden color on top, not too dark on the bottom. These did take just about 22 minutes. Oh, a little bit of filling leaking out of this one, but nothing too tragic. So we certainly hope you give these a try and you check back every Friday at 4 o'clock for a new recipe.